I like it personally. It really resonates with my philosophic mind. And once again, I'm not saying that that's how it is. It's a philosopher attempting to explain what appears to be a contradiction in scriptures or a logical tension between sovereignty and freedom.
I think there's a big difference, though, between saying God can look all the way down the timeline of humanity and know what you have chosen, so therefore he is predestinate, and a difference between saying God is actually turning off those different choices. So yes, you have the ability to make those choices, but in effect, they're turned off. To me, it seems like the same idea as putting a rat in a maze and blocking off the areas you don't want him to go to and saying, well, he could have gone if those weren't blocked off. But in reality, you are directing which way the rat is going, even though there could have potentially been other choices. And it seems like if that's the case, you have removed the characteristic of just from who God is. That if God has predetermined all of your actions, then I think you're getting to the slippery slope of predestination right there.
Yeah, I like that very much. I like that analogy, Rocky. What's weird though, it's not, if we go with the rat analogy, it's not like God has only left one path open in the maze and blocked the other. So he's only left one path open in the rat's mind. The maze appears wide open, but that rat, God knows which path it's going to take. The rat that would have taken other paths, God didn't make that rat. And I know it's back in the predetermined part, but I mean, once again, it kind of comes down to Leibniz really wants the culpability for our personal decisions and choices, right? We already talked about we can't have morals and ethics without choice, without a human volition. But on the flip side, he wants to maintain that sovereignty of God.
My question is, how do we reconcile that? Like, it sounds good if you think about people whose lives are good in the sense of, or in contrast to those who would be considered bad in a general sense of like those who murder or those who rape or those, you know. So how do you reconcile that when you say like, you know, it's predetermined? You know, it seems that would be a good cookie cutter fit for those who have live good, somewhat good lives. But then what about how we contrast that? Could that same thing be said for that population?
Yeah, and I want to go back to Rocky with what he was saying too. And you guys are dovetailing with each other. It still kind of seems unjust, right? Like, well, why did you make me a rapist? Or why did you make me a murderer? Or why did you make me a liar and a cheat? And God, I think from Leibniz's model, he's saying those were real choices you made. And for whatever, well, not for whatever reason, for God maximizing his glory, that is the version of you he put on this earth. Like, let me make it into a personal example. Did Judas have a choice on whether or not to betray Jesus? How would Rocky?
I think he absolutely had a choice.
Really?
I believe he had a choice, yes.
Doesn't in
And
one part of
Jesus,
the scripture say that like Satan or like a demon or something entered him before it happened though?
It does. But he still gets credit for the betrayal.
yeah, and
They
there were
don't
steps he
blame the
took
demon or
before the demon influenced him or took control of him that led
Right.
him down that path.
Well,
Kind of like how you were talking about Pharaoh last week.
So I think like the oversimplified answer is that he did make the choice. It's just God knew what choice he was going to make. I mean, that maybe contradicts itself in its own statement, but that's how I've always seen it. And back to like the rat maze thing, you know, that there are different options to go through the maze, but the result at the end of the maze is the same, which is God's perfect plan. Does that make
Yes.
sense? So
Yes, and I think that's kind of what Leibniz was getting at, was with all of us, I mean, what are we, over 8 billion people on the planet right now? With all of us making thousands of choices every day, God is so sovereign that he can take all those choices and still make them converge to his plan. And to me, that is mind expanding about this idea of God. I don't know if any of you guys are into Star Trek Next Generation or any of that, but there was an episode with Geordi. He was a blind guy, and he had this like visor that allowed him to see. And there was this phenomena in space that was connected with this visor somehow. And they were talking about like a multiverse, and all these different enterprises had converged in the same space and time, not in different multiverses where they were supposed to be, but you had all these different scenarios, but every single ship was slightly different. And it was based on choices crew members had made. And in some of them, you had different captains, you had different chief of staffs, etc. And that's how I'm seeing what Leibniz is thinking. In fact, I think they stole that episode idea from Leibniz, and this idea of subtle variations can make changes. Like, think about simple little choices you made in your life that had life-changing ramifications. And it's mind-boggling. And we all have multiples of those, not just what color socks we're going to wear, but real life-altering choices we've all made in life. And Leibniz is trying to say God can take all those derivations and still converge them back to his will because of the power of his omniscience and the power of his will to bring things about. And Roy and Rocky both danced around it, but didn't quite bring it up, talking about the difference between the foreknowledge of God, which would tie into his omniscience, that God knows everything, but predestination's a little stronger, in my opinion. It's not that just God knows everything, but he foreordained certain things to happen. In fact, we're told we are predestined to salvation and to good works. How wonderful is that? For not just God knows who's going to be saved, but God has predestined those that will be saved. Now, I've argued with my Calvinist friends and whatnot about this idea of double predestination. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but this idea that some people are predestined to hell and some are predestined to heaven. I find the predestined to heaven in scripture. I don't find the predestined to hell. And I find plenty of passages that say God does not want any to perish. God is long-suffering, merciful. I don't think that's in his heart, but for whatever reason, to maximize his glory, it appears the majority will perish. It implies that very few find the narrow gate. And I don't understand that.
Isn't
Okay.
it important, like or I guess part of the problem, like just that we think about these things and we try and like logic through it. Like at some point the paradoxes are essentially filled by faith, no? Isn't that kind of the idea? That we're not all knowing, that we have to be comfortable with not having all the answers at some point?
Oh, I hope so, because the older I get, the fewer answers I have. And I love that you brought up the paradox again too, Nathan. Paradoxes are one of my absolute favorite things.